Picture of the White House on this Saturday afternoon in December, and an even closer up picture of the south grounds of the White House there, the lectern with the symbol of the President of the United States. Inside that building, the President is meeting with Democrats in the House. We presume these are only the Democrats who voted against the articles of impeachment. There were 5 Democrats who voted, who separated from their own party and voted to impeach the President, at least on the first article. We presume this group meeting with President Clinton are only the ones who expressed their support for him. We are told, we were just talking before this break about how quickly the Republicans have coalesced and come together in the House to try to come up with a candidate to replace Bob Livingston as the incoming Speaker of the House. And the man who apparently is going to be the choice of the majority there, Dennis Hastert, representing Illinois' 14th District, is going to have a news conference this afternoon at 4:45 Eastern. CNN will be bringing that to you live. This following on the heels of President Clinton's statement to the American people at 4 o'clock. It's coming up in just about 12 minutes. Now to the White House, where Wolf Blitzer, you're waiting to see what's going on.
You know, interestingly enough, Judy, Dennis Hastert is not well known. His name is not well known to a lot of people, including here in Washington, certainly not nationally, but within the ranks of the Republicans and within the ranks of the House of Representatives, he's highly respected and someone that is emerging as this front runner now to succeed Bob Livingston as the Speaker designate of the House of Representatives. Amazing how these things unfold. We are waiting for the President to walk out of the White House together with a lot of Democratic members of the House of Representatives. They will be speaking, they will be insisting that this was an unfair process that President Clinton had to endure, that it should not go forward, that the Senate should find an opportunity for a quick bipartisan compromise short of impeachment. That's code words for a very tough censure resolution, which President Clinton has already signaled he would readily accept. At this point, it will also be interesting to see if the First Lady emerges with the Democratic members and the President for what is in effect going to be this pep rally here at the White House to signal that the President is A, determined to go forward, B, to do the nation's work, and C, to fight this impeachment process as vigorously as he possibly can.
Well, if you raise the First Lady, has she been with the President today as these votes have been taking place?
As you know, she was over at up on the Hill this morning at 8:30 Washington time for her own private rally behind closed doors, meeting with the Democratic leadership, thanking them for supporting her husband in the face of these very, very stiff impeachment articles. She did come back here. We don't know if she was with the President. We do know that that the President, during the actual first vote on the first article of impeachment, which of course passed, he was with his his minister and advisor, the Reverend Tony Campala of Philadelphia, who was with him. Tony Campala walking past our position here later, leaving the White House, telling us that he prayed with the President. He described the President as being upbeat about the prospects for avoiding being thrown out of the presidency, but at the same time he described the President as, quote, very tired.
Wolf, is it going to change things for this President to be in this very strange period of having been impeached by the House, waiting to see if he can work out a censure by the Senate? I mean, whatever they say about being determined to press ahead with the nation's business and so forth, it has to be a very, very unusual time for them.
Well, the biggest fear that some of his supporters, some of his advisors have is that it could affect him emotionally. That's one of the reasons why the Democratic House members have come over here, that he could get depressed. He is a student of history. He knows what this means. He knows that this is the last thing, of course, any president would want to see happen. And they would just want to make sure that he continues to be focused. President Clinton is well known for compartmentalizing, but even the great compartmentalizer is going to have a very difficult time in the next few weeks getting through this process.
Wolf, if I could just interrupt, I'm told that Representative Christopher Cox, a conservative Republican from California, is at a stakeout talking with reporters. We're going to take you there now.
On us. whether it's Hanukkah just finished, Ramadan commencing, or Christmas week. We have plenty enough, all of us, in our professional lives and in our families to deal with right now.
To deal with that, will you be asking any other members trying to sound them out on whether you would get their vote for
The
Speaker?
proper and the normal way for the House of Representatives to select its leaders is for members to make that determination themselves by talking to one another, by feeling out one another's positions, by gaining an understanding of the vision that each of us might have for the coming session of Congress for the next 2 years. And of course, it isn't too difficult to imagine in just over 600 days that there will be an election for the White House as well. All of these things are best discussed in our internal leadership contests among members themselves. And right now we have a lot of people headed for the airport, headed for airplanes, finally getting back to their homes and their families. Even members of Congress, even leaders of our government engaged in weighty business such as this appreciate the opportunity to celebrate the holidays with family.
It sounds like you are potentially a candidate, and you're going to be working the phones over the next 2 weeks.
Actually, right now I'm headed to a leadership meeting. We've had 2 leadership meetings already during the course of the day, and we're having another one just now because setting our schedule and getting that word out to members, some of whom are still in town and the rest of whom are winging their way back home, is vitally important.
Mr. Carson, earlier the Speaker, Mr. Gingrich, spoke up and endorsed Mr. Hastert in the meeting that just finished and talked about the qualities it takes to be an effective Speaker. Do you agree with Speaker Gingrich's assessment of what it takes to be a good Speaker and what those qualities, and if you agree with his assessment on Mr. Hastert?
Certainly, nobody is more expert about the job of being Speaker than the person who is just stepping down. And I respect Newt as former Speaker of the House, as a current Speaker of the House, frankly, and as a visionary leader that helped us win an historic election in 1994 and an historic election again in 1996 and again in 1998. The member or members that will step forward to succeed Speaker Gingrich will undoubtedly be a close friend of mine, a person that I respect, whomever it is. And of course, as you know, I ran for Speaker just a few weeks ago at the same time that Bob Livingston ran, and that is very much in prospect again.
Mr. Combined with his endorsement, the fact that Mr. Hastert is the Chief Deputy Whip and has that organization, at least those members at his disposal, do you think that makes that much more difficult for your candidacy?
I think, first of all, you're getting ahead of yourself. As I said, I think this is up to our members. It's important to point out that none of the people that you're talking about has announced his or her candidacy for the speakership. This is not the day to do that. Second, it's very clear that these are all people who respect one another, who work together, who sit side by side. You mentioned Denny Hastert. I sit next to him in the Government Reform and Oversight Committee, where I've been vice chairman. He and I belong to a group that gets together every Wednesday at 5. He's been a good friend of mine for 10 years, and there are other people that you have not mentioned that would make outstanding speakers of the House. All of the people that I know that might be interested or ought to be interested, I have enormous respect for, are good friends of mine, and that's the nature of this. It isn't the kind of thing where you've got someone running against another individual because they strongly disagree with that person or think that they would be the negative to their positive or positive to their negative. Rather, this is a question of who among our own we wish to have lead the majority. And as I've said many, many times, the Speaker of the House is the Speaker of the whole House. And there never has that been a more important fact to observe than now, when our partisan majority is quite narrow.
Mr. Cox, what's it going to take for you to make up your
Republican
mind?
Christopher Cox, California, Newport Beach, California, I believe, just elected to his 6th term last month, making it clear that the selection of the next speaker among the Republicans is not a done deal. He's sounding very much like a candidate. He reminds us that he ran against Bob Livingston. He didn't succeed then, but it sounds like he's not prepared to accept the notion Frank Sesno, you and I were just talking about there's an effort to put a move together for Dennis Hastert. The President of the United States, I'm told, is just moments away from stepping out on the south grounds of the White House to speak to the American people. We have a camera there. We're going to bring that to you just as soon as it happens. John King is at the White House. John, tell us anything you've learned about this meeting that's been underway.
Judy, the President in the residence portion of the White House meeting with House Democrats, that part described mainly as a pep rally. Democrats making clear to the President that they want him to stand by and stay in office and not answer these Republican calls for his resignation now that he has been impeached. We're told outside here when the President comes out, we'll get a mixed message. From the President himself, we're told the President will say that he's determined to stay on, that he's disappointed by this vote, but that he thinks the best way to bring all this to an end, this nearly year-long political drama now, is for some quick bipartisan solution in the Senate. We're also expecting a much more partisan message from the President's aides and from the House Democrats on hand. They will make the case, we're told, that this has been a Republican vendetta against the President, that today's votes, the 2 articles of impeachment that were approved largely on party line votes, and that they think the President should stay on, and that the country not only wants him to stay on, but wants all this brought to an end.
John, I want to ask you the same question I posed to Wolf just a few moments ago, and that is, how strange is it going to be for the White House to have a president who's been impeached by one of the 2 houses of Congress facing a trial in the other body? How is that going to affect his ability to do his job every day?
Well, that is the big question here, and it is the political dynamic the White House fears most, that there will now be calls that the President should step down because he cannot govern effectively, that a Senate trial would paralyze the government for 3, 4, maybe even 6 months. The White House very worried about that political environment as it prepares to make its case in the Senate. That's why the President wanted to speak out today and have an enthusiastic audience on hand to make it clear that he wants to fight on, that he hopes for a bipartisan compromise, and that he has no plans of resigning. Very difficult, though. The President, as he's dealt with this situation this week, not only the impeachment debate, but the situation in Iraq, has been preparing his State of the Union address, has been preparing his new budget, aides the whole time wondering if this President can be effective at all. Even many of his own aides questioning whether anything can get done in the final 2 years of his term, assuming he survives, because of the partisan atmosphere in Washington these past several months, particularly these past several days.
John, it's Jeff Greenfield. 4 different times this year, the President's tried to address this issue in one way or another. It seems to always have been a disaster, from the famous finger wag to the August 17th speech to the 81 questions to his speech last Friday. Are they aware of this track record as they prepared today's remarks?
They certainly know that when the President has tried to address the substance of this issue, he has generally suffered, either politically here in Washington or legally with the independent counsel. That's why we're told to look for a much more broader political message from the President. The President has done in the past when he's been in crises, he has done well when he has framed this as him against the Republicans, when he has framed it as an effort to keep him from doing his job. We're told that will be the President's message today. The thing, again, the White House is worried about most is the idea that now that the President has been impeached, more and more Republicans saying he should step aside and resign, spare the country a Senate trial. The White House does not want that sentiment to catch on with the American public. So the main objective for the President today is to make clear he has no thoughts of stepping down.
John, given the momentary stunned and disarrayed picture in the Republican Party, might not the President also extend an olive branch to the Republicans?
The President certainly, Bernie, we're told by our sources, will say that he thinks it's time for an end to what people have been calling all day the politics of personal destruction. Again, ask for a quick bipartisan compromise in the Senate, make clear that he believes he should be held accountable for his actions, just that he simply doesn't believe they rise to the level of his being removed from office. Now, the President has made the case for months that they don't rise to the level of impeachment, and obviously today he became the 2nd president in history impeached by the House of Representatives. The Senate, known as a more deliberative body, known as a less partisan body, the President now hoping that he can negotiate on better terms in the Senate, one thing we should remember, this is a president with very few personal relationships with people in the U.S. Congress. That has made it more difficult for this president, particularly in the House, because of the 1995 budget battle, because of the themes of the president's 1996 re-election campaign. The White House believes it has a better chance in the Senate, but certainly, as we have learned these past 11 months, a very unpredictable political environment when it comes to the Monica Lewinsky scandal.
And since he sent his White House press secretary Lockhart out earlier to express Mr. Clinton's thoughts about Bob Livingston, the Speaker-elect, not only resigning the speakership, but also planning in 6 months to leave his Louisiana House seat, conceivably the president might have something to say about Mr. Livingston.
Whether he will address it directly himself here, we don't know, but that, again, part of a quick White House political reaction, one, to deliver a high-minded message that people should not have to resign, that there should not be this microscopic look at people's personal lives, but also the White House was in a mini panic about that very quickly, worried that if Speaker Livingston resigned, that again, in this political climate, there would be more calls for the president to follow suit. Already, the Speaker Gingrich, the current Speaker's press secretary, said that President Clinton could end all this today if he would just follow the example of Bob Livingston. The White House does not want resignation to become the talk of the country. Wants to quash that talk today, make it clear, citing the polls, that the will of the American people is that this be brought to a quick conclusion.
John, do we know who came to the White House to see the president?
Initially, Judy, this was to be just the 8 members of the House Democratic leadership, led by, obviously, the Democratic leader Dick Gephardt and his top deputies. But after the First Lady went to the House Democratic caucus this morning, gave what we're told was quite an emotional and rousing speech to them, other members asked if they could come along, too. So they actually had some buses to bring members down. We've seen dozens of the 200 Democrats come down to the White House. Exactly how many, we don't know. But what was supposed to be a crowd of 8 for a small, relatively low-key event will now be a large crowd for a pep rally.
John, interesting, that subject. Who went in? I'm wondering whether there were any members of the United States Senate, Democrats, who potentially would be jurors in a Senate trial.
One is here, Bernie, Senator-elect Chuck Schumer of New York, who is a member of the House, a member of the Judiciary Committee, who voted no on impeachment in committee, voted no again on the floor, and has already said he will vote no, vote not to convict the president if this comes the full course and runs a trial in the Senate. No other members of the Senate here. Again, that part of the very carefully calculated political strategy the White House employing right now. It's looking to start over in the Senate, looking to strike a much more bipartisan tone. The House Democrats will deliver the partisan message here today. The president's aides will deliver that message. No senators here today because the White House hoping, and actually hoping very urgently between now and when the Senate comes back in January, to change the climate of this debate, to convince the Republican leadership that there's not a strong case against the president, that the best way out of this is a quick bipartisan censure deal. And the part of that White House argument will be that if you look at the polls right now, the Republican Congress in its lowest standing in months, part of the White House political argument is not only is it in the best interest of this Democratic president to get back to work, but that the Republican Congress would do a much better job of currying favor with the voters if it got back to legislative business as well.
Speaking of polls, John, we know this White House is fond of looking at them. What have they been seeing in the numbers that have come out over the last week or two about just how strong the president's position is?
The president's surface approval ratings remain quite high, in the 60% range in our polling as well as in the White House polling. What they do worry about here at the White House, again, more and more Americans open to this idea that if there is going to be a lengthy Senate trial, should the president perhaps step aside in the best interest of the country? Those numbers rising, not at any alarming scale yet, our White House sources tell us, but getting to a point that makes them worry. They also say, though, White House officials tell us that the last 2 elections have been a race for what they call in Washington the political center, moderates, and they say that the Republican numbers in that area have nosedived, that the public more and more views the Republicans as more conservative, more radical, and that will be part of the White House message to the Senate, that it's in the best interest of Senate Republicans to get back to business because they're suffering in the polls as well. But again, this is a very unpredictable climate. Nobody knows how this will play out. That's why the president wants it over as soon as possible.
John, as we wait for the president to come out, and there we do
out, Judy,
see
so I'm
a
gonna step
picture
down.
of the president walking across, and we see Mrs. Clinton with him, and they are making their way to that camera position there on the south grounds.
They've just come from the residence, and they're actually walking along the portico there.
Is my mic open?
I'm told that they are going to the Oval Office.
They're going to come along the colonnade, Judy. You see the president, the vice president, the Democratic leader, Richard Gephardt of Missouri, and also John Podesta, the White House chief of staff, and the first lady to the president's right. We're told here that Mr. Podesta will speak, Mr. Gephardt, followed by the vice president, and then the president. We were not told in advance that the first lady would have a speaking role, but obviously she is here as well to show support for her husband as the president makes his way past the Oval Office there, and he's going to step inside for a moment, obviously.
John, you were talking about the White House being concerned about what's going to happen in the Senate for all sorts of obvious reasons. Is it possible now to name any particular Democratic senators who the White House is worried about as potential defectors if this were to come to trial?
Well, one they're worried about not necessarily as a defector, but as a defender of the Constitution, someone who wants a trial. Bobby Byrd of West Virginia, he is a stickler for the rules in the Senate, and he has already met with the current Senate Democratic leader Tom Daschle to say this process should run its constitutional course. If you remember back when the Starr report first came out, the president's biggest political problem was in the Senate, not the House. That was a surprise to many people in Washington. Because of the partisan nature of the debate in recent weeks, White House officials now feel confident that much like in the House, there would be very few defections if this ever came all the way to a trial and a vote on whether to convict the president. Again, they hope that doesn't happen, though. The president has spoken to the Democratic leader Tom Daschle in the last 48 hours, reached out to Senator Ed Kennedy of Massachusetts, among others, his friends in the Senate, asking them for advice. John Breaux of Louisiana, always a close friend of this president, known as a deal maker in the Senate. He would be important. And two former senators might play a very big role here. The president asking former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, a Democrat, to take a lead role in his defense, expecting a yes from former Senator Mitchell in the next few days. Also, the president reaching out to his opponent in the 1996 presidential election, the former Senate Majority Leader on the Republican side, Bob Dole, asking Senator Dole in a much more informal way to help. We see the Democrats coming in here. I'm going to step down so we can see some of the members of Congress filing in as well.
That's right, John. We wanted to interrupt you just for a moment to explain who these people are. These are Democratic members of the House of Representatives, all of whom joined in an unsuccessful effort to defeat 2 articles of impeachment against the president. It looks like a pretty substantial group. Frank says no.
I'd just like to make a point here, Judy. This is a very, very important moment for the president because it has been the president against the world to a very large extent up until now. By this demonstration of solidarity here, it becomes the president and the Democrats. They're not all there, but it is the Democratic Party. And that picture with Dick Gephardt walking with Al Gore and Mrs. Clinton, you know, clearly Gephardt and Gore have not been the best of chums, nor has Gephardt with the president.
And they may be running against one another for president someday.
Who knows? You know, there's certainly talk of that, although Gephardt's been throttling back. But this is critical to the president's case.
I just think the point also ought to be made that the question about what happens in the Senate becomes very critical because there are those, and I talked to one Democratic senator who said, don't be so sure that there will be a solid phalanx of votes to acquit among Democrats. There are some names floated around. Certainly, retiring New York Senator Moynihan has not been a big fan of the president in many specific policy areas. Bob Kerrey once called him an unusually good liar. I mean, there are some concerns there that as the trial goes on and the perjury case becomes made, I don't think they know for sure that they've got all those Democrats on their side.
John King, I wanted to ask you about the name that Jeff mentioned, Pat Moynihan of New York, retiring. Any concerns?
He's one of the senators.
Okay, you all right now?
About on the Democratic side, as Jeff has mentioned, a frequent critic of this president, as is Bob Kerrey. One of the messages the White House will make to senators like Senator Moynihan, one of his major projects, one of the things he hopes to accomplish before he retires is another step toward bipartisan Social Security reform. Any progress on big issues like that, particularly issues that have such a potential to be so partisan, depends on, in the White House view and in the view of even the Republicans in Washington, putting this beside us. Nobody thinks if there's a 4-month, 6-month Senate trial, that much work will get done toward reforming Social Security and other legislative priorities of both parties.
John, are you able to get close enough to any of these members at this point to talk with them, or are they still, or do they have you behind a rope line still?
They have us politely behind a rope line, Judy. The Secret Service in the garden here, waiting for the president to come out. We will try to corral some of these Democrats on the way out, but for now, they're standing by waiting for the president. You see right up there in the front row, John Conyers of Michigan, obviously a familiar face to Americans these past few weeks, as he has led the Democrats on the Judiciary Committee in fighting this impeachment battle. Obviously a losing cause in the committee, but he has been the Democratic leader these past few weeks and these past few days on the floor of the House of Representatives.
Close but so far away. We know, John, that you're off camera there to the left of our viewer screen. I know that because I saw you about 10 minutes ago. But we'll just have to wait and see. I'm certain they'll be willing to talk quite freely once the principals have made their remarks.
The message they want to deliver, Bernie, is that this has been a process unfair to the president, running contrary to the will of the American people, if you believe the public opinion polls. The Democrats very interested, as this moves on to the Senate, of making the case that the president has not been treated fairly. And let's talk bald politics for a minute. Many Democrats believed, regardless of what happens to President Clinton, that this debate will help them heading into the 2000 elections. 65 of the Republicans who voted yes on at least one article of impeachment today have districts that President Clinton carried in the 1996 presidential election. Not a subject people want to talk openly about because this is about such a grave constitutional issue, the impeachment of a president. But Democrats also see the potential for some political gain out of the debate we've seen in Washington the past few weeks.
Frank Cesno's point a moment ago about how you cannot overemphasize the importance of this picture, that this is not just the president coming out alone or just the president and the minority leader Dick Gephardt. This is the president and what appears to be dozens of Democrats from the House of Representatives, people who stood with him, and now you see the door to the Oval Office has opened.
That's Chris Ensko, one of the president's personal aides, bringing the president's remarks up to the podium, which generally means we're a minute or two away from seeing the president out here.
You see, I was just going to say, we can see a picture perhaps that you're not able to yet, John. This is the president, the first lady, with her arm, her hand through his arm, followed closely by the vice president. And
I don't know, Judy, but I could swear I just saw the president brushed what may have been tears away from both eyes. I don't want to leap to conclusions here, but he clearly did that. You know, arm in arm, this has been just an amazing day. You're going to hear from the president and others, enough is enough. That's what you're going to hear. It's going to be about his life and this investigation about Bob Livingston, and they're going to be really launching a full-scale offensive to save this presidency. It starts right here.
On behalf of the President and the First Lady, the Vice President, Mrs. Gore, the White House, and the entire administration, I want to thank the members who came here today and all of the members who stood with you on the floor of the House over the past several days. Thank you for standing up for what you believe in. Thank you for standing up for fairness. Thank you for standing up for the American people. Thank you for standing up for the Constitution. And thank you for doing so with dignity and determination, passion and patriotism. I would like to introduce a man who has done so much for our country, a great leader, a great friend of the American people, Congressman Dick Gephardt.
Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, First Lady Hillary Clinton. We've just witnessed a partisan vote that was a disgrace to our country and our Constitution. Chairman Henry Hyde once called impeachment the ultimate weapon and said that for it to succeed, ultimately it has to be bipartisan. The fact that a vote as important as this occurred in such a partisan way violated the spirit of our democracy. We must turn away now from the politics of personal destruction and return to a politics of values. The American people deserve better than what they've received over these long 5 months. They want their Congress to bring this issue to